Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Council's Executive Committee. Delighted to be back in the Town Hall extension again, although not delighted to be in tier 3, but then you can't have everything. If we move to the formal parts of the agenda, item 1 is appeals.
None, Chair.
Item 2, interests. I think I probably have to declare a prejudicial interest on item 11, amendment to the Hackney Carriage fare card as Director of Manchester Airport Holdings. So I will ask Nigel Murphy to take the chair at that point. Item 3 minutes. Can we agree those? Item 4 is the COVID-19 monthly update report. Could I give the floor to Councillor Craig?
Thanks, Chair. I'll give an overview and then I'll ask David Regan, our Director of Public Health, to come in afterwards with some additional detail. Obviously, this is quite a fast-moving area, and a lot of this changes. At times, it feels on an hourly basis, never mind from day to day. Just to begin with, in terms of the numbers, which is where we often start, the trajectory in the city remains positive. Our overall prevalence rate sits at 164 cases per 100,000, which is one of the indicators that the government sets nationally that I'll come on to. Our rate within the over 60s in the city continues also to decline, sitting slightly higher at the moment at 189 cases per 100,000, but continues to decrease. We're also receiving positive news within hospitals that our admissions are declining, both in the city and across GM. But I would stress that hospitals are reporting that capacity is still tight, and indeed they are stretched on many fronts, and some of the things that they would like to do in hospitals beyond the emergency and specialist operations that they're doing at the moment, they're still unable to do. What they do report, though, is that the increase of length of stays of people in hospital actually comes from something very positive. And I think it's important to note that an increasing length of stay is showing that actually people have got more of a chance of surviving COVID. And I think that's really positive. I think what the numbers are saying probably leads us on to the question that is on everyone's list, everyone's lips in terms of what tier do we go into? Can we go to tier 2? When can I go to the pub? When can I go to the restaurant? And what I would stress within this is that in Manchester and across Greater Manchester, we don't make that decision. What we do is present the evidence, and the government have said that they will assess us and measure us on the basis of our prevalence, which is coming down, the rate in our over 60s, which continues to come down, the pressure on our hospitals and other associated measures with it. So I would say that the trajectory is definitely positive. The case that we'll be making looks along the lines that I suppose I would just reflect when Liverpool moved into tier 2, their prevalence was at 170. So I think in some ways the numbers speak for themselves. But when we come on to the 12-point plan that David will touch on, I wanted to re-emphasise the cautious message. I know everyone's excited about a bit of normality over Christmas, and I think it's important that people have a chance to come together and be with their families, but I would also, I know it's a view of the Director of Public Health as well, urge caution and consideration in the plans that people make over the festive period. Those 5 days between Christmas and New Year could prove to be quite a crucial period, I think, as we move into January, into February. So I just ask people to display common sense and caution and continue to work together as we have been doing in the city. I wanted to also just share a bit of update on 3, I think, increasingly positive areas. The first I will touch on briefly, which is testing. We've always stated in the last few months that we would be interested in running our own version of targeted community testing, the testing for people who don't currently have symptoms. And this is a fast-moving picture that David will update on, but we're resubmitting a plan to attempt to get government go-ahead to roll some of that out, both before Christmas, but particularly early in the new year. In terms of some other positive news, I wanted to just talk about care home visiting. We've talked about this for a number of months now, particularly nationally. And I totally accept and appreciate it's a very, very difficult circumstance at the moment for our Manchester people living in care homes, but also for families that want to visit and see their loved ones. And throughout this crisis, we've been working really hard to support our care homes. Often, on the face of it, not receiving much support nationally to do that, but we have tried our very best to give them support. But we've also listened to what they've been saying, what their staff have been saying, and what families are saying is that they want to visit their family as soon as they can, but they want to do it in the safest possible way. I've spoken previously that there are some concerns around the accuracy of just using a lateral flow test, so that's the 30-minute result test. So we're have agreed a position that would see 2 tests. So to visit your loved one, you'd receive 2 negative results. One would be from a standard COVID test up to 3 days in advance, and the other would be a negative lateral flow test on the day. Now, this sounds really complicated, and we're working with care homes, and care homes will be writing out and contacting directly the families of people who live there. But we believe that a little bit extra complexity really does give added and extra security to make sure that we're protecting people who are most at risk should they contract it. So we'll start to see some movement on that in the coming days, working with care homes to make sure they've got the support they need in the system. And then the final thing I'll say, which I'll end on a positive, which I've not always been doing in these monthly updates, is around the vaccine. We've seen a lot in media coverage around the good news of people receiving vaccinations. And from, I think, in the coming days, kind of over the course of the next week, we'll begin to see vaccines rolled out in Manchester hospitals for both inpatients and also health and care workers. And from next week, we'll see the first wave of community vaccinations for the over 80s in the city, beginning first with Wythenshawe and then expanding across the city. I know David will touch on that in a bit more detail, but I just wanted to share a bit of positivity going into December.
Thanks, Councillor Craig. I might just share a bit of very recently acquired knowledge about the 2 tests for care and why that model, which is that I'm told, and it's by the director, or actually it's by the president of the Association of Directors of Public Health, so I think it's reasonably reliable, that the PCR, the standard test that Councillor Craig referred to, is very reliable for quite a long life of the antigens being in the body, whereas the lateral flow test is only accurate for a relatively short period of time when the antigens are relatively newly acquired. So by doing standard tests first, gives very high level of reliability. But if in between having done that test and it being proved negative, then within 3 days, a lateral flow test would be very accurate within that period of time. So it is a methodology that gives that deals with the. It's not that the lateral flow test is apparently inaccurate. It's only that the period of time it is accurate for is a much shorter period of time. I think we've got the Director of Public Health online somewhere. David, do you want to join us from wherever you are?
Yes, thanks Richard, and thanks to Councillor Craig. Nothing much to add really in terms of the data, just as Councillor Craig said, just some more information around our targeted testing at scale programme. So I've just actually had a meeting with the military personnel to look at the logistical support they'll be able to provide to the city in mobilising our targeted testing at scale programme. As Councillor Craig said, we're going to start small before Christmas in terms of making sure we support care home visiting in an appropriate way, also looking at other options for testing specific occupational groups. And then very early in the new year, we will mobilise a much bigger community programme for lateral flow tests, asymptomatic case finding, basically making sure we find those cases where certain parts of our city where the prevalence has been high, for a considerable period of time, doing more work in those target areas, and actually establishing testing sites nearer to where people can get a test. We know from the Liverpool experience, some aspects of that pilot worked really well, but by their own admission, they didn't reach all the people they intended to reach. And that's where we can learn from the Liverpool pilot, use the Army logistics support, and actually work with our universities as well. They've just completed their testing program to allow the students to return home for Christmas. Again, a lot of learning around the logistics, around the workforce, around the methodology. So we're in a good place in Manchester to build on that experience very quickly and get that support, and also financial resources to enable us to do this programme before Christmas and in the new year. But that's all I wanted to add, Chair, in terms of the targeted testing.
Thank you, David. Councillor Carney.
I just want to make 2 points. Obviously, thank yourself and Councillor Craig for the extraordinary amount of work that you've put into this over the last few months. Just the 2 points I want to make is I hope that we go into Tier 2 next week. On Saturday morning, I was in the Arndale, which is very well regulated, very rigorous queue control, but I was there with hundreds of people. And then when I went across to the Metro Cafe, a favourite cafe of North Manchester people, you literally had to stand outside, obviously, to drink a cup of tea. And so you left the venue where there's hundreds of people and a relatively small premises, the Metro Cafe, and you stood outside. Obviously on Tier 2 you could actually sit inside. So I hope we can go to Tier 2 next week in Manchester. Just one brief point about the vaccine. We all jumped for joy when I think we saw Maggie, who from Ireland, in Coventry, I think it was, 6:30 yesterday morning. She was the first person in the UK to get the vaccine. Within 20 minutes, the anti-vaxxers said cruelly that she died 12 years ago. She died in 2008, and that the people actually at the hospital, the nurse and Maggie herself, were actors. Now, this is a small minority of the public, but it's a dangerous minority of the public who are mounting this anti-vax campaign, and we saw it in Piccadilly twice in the last month, large crowds shouting that they won't take the vax. And I think it's important that we keep up the work on countering that dangerous nonsense, medieval nonsense really in many ways, and that when the opportunity arises, I'm sure every councillor on this council, people who are in public life like ourselves, will take the opportunity to be vaccinated. I notice in America that George Bush and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama are going to go on television and are going to be vaccinated. I think people in public life should be vaccinated because there's a lot of dangerous medieval nonsense around.
Any other members? Yeah, just in terms of the tiers, that there is not a risk-free approach until we probably have a large proportion of the population vaccinated, and there's a survey that Greater Manchester have done indicates that something like 77% of people surveyed said that they would take the vaccine, which is higher than the national average, which it could do with it being higher still, but that's good. But until we've got that level of vaccination, is that the virus is likely to be in wide circulation, although given that we are going to start with people who are most vulnerable, that we would certainly expect, again, the number of people hospitalised to go down as it takes effect with that proportion of the population. But until that time, there is no risk-free route. That what Councillor Carney said about the difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3 is absolutely right. What we've argued for all the time is that all publicly open premises should be treated in the same way, not hospitality treated different to retail, different to galleries. And if they put the effort in to make themselves safe, they stay open, and if they haven't, then we close them down. And I think that should still be the approach. I think we've also argued that closing hospitality down doesn't stop people socialising, particularly younger people. I think as the residents of Fallowfield and part of Hume find out pretty much every weekend, but it's not just in Fallowfield and Hume. And indeed, I think Liverpool have been reporting that their restaurant bookings are really, really high, and a large proportion of that is people from Manchester. Similarly for Cheshire, that people are travelling. If they can't do it here, they travel, and we know that that is worse than being able to do it here. So it is probably a self-defeating policy as it is at the moment. As Bev said, Cass Craig said, the numbers say that if we are going to be treated in the same way as places like London and Liverpool were when decisions were made 2 weeks ago, we ought to be moving into Tier 2. But I think we do need to put a very clear public message alongside that, is that if whatever tier we are in, if we go into Tier 2, if we aim for Tier 1, that being able to stay in that tier will depend on people behaving in a sensible, responsible way. And it's only by that we will avoid the real risk, and the real risk is post-Christmas, post-New Year, everybody goes mad. The numbers will probably continue to go down until the middle of January, but then they start going up, and by the end of January we're back into another lockdown. So there is really an onus on us to behave sensibly, to behave responsibly, and that way, until the vaccine takes full effect, we can try and stay in a place where we do have more of the personal freedom that we are used to. Make quite clear. I was at the COVID Emergency Committee this morning that I'll be supporting a move to Tier 2, and I think Greater Manchester, or the majority of Greater Manchester, will be supporting a move to Tier 2 as well. We do have, of course, geographical differences between the north and south around COVID prevalence, but actually if you take the overall numbers for Greater Manchester, they would, and the trends and direction of travel, they would say we should be in Tier 2. Thanks for that. If it's one bit of hard bad news, we now move to another one, which is the settlement, the spending review announcement that was made a couple of weeks ago. We don't expect to know in detail the implications for local government until I think the Deputy Chief Executive will give the latest intelligence, but something like 17th, 18th of December. It's probably a bit earlier than we've had it in previous years. When it's been the 23rd, I think, of December, we've had the provisional settlement out. That does mean there's going to be a very intense period of putting our budget together, which is not the best way of doing budget planning. The fact it's one-year budget is also not the best way of doing budget planning either, but that's the position we've been forced into. And I'll say a little bit more after the Deputy Chief Executive, but although the indicative figures are perhaps better than we might have expected, they're certainly not better than we hoped for. And there is still nothing in there that adequately compensates us for loss of income this year and future years. There is still, and I think this is an absolute scandal, there is still no proper settlement for social care, no proper long-term settlement for social care, notwithstanding the fact that the public now know more than ever the contribution that adult care makes because of the last 10 months. The fact that we still don't have a proper settlement, we still don't have at least real living wage for a lot of care workers is an absolute scandal. That's not contained within the settlement. So it does not meet our aspirations. If the Chancellor of the Exchequer is saying austerity is over, well, on that budget or that settlement, the austerity is not over in Manchester. it will be continuing for some time. And we will, as always, do the best we can with what we have available, but we simply cannot allow government to get away with saying that austerity is over when we are still paying the price for 10 years of austerity, and what was announced there actually will lead to things being worse, not to things being better in Greater Manchester. Maybe not as bad as they could have been, but it's really, really sad, isn't it, that when we get ourselves into a position where having to make maybe £50 million worth of cuts next year becomes almost good news because of what it could have been otherwise. It's a shocking position for us to be in, and it will have an impact on Manchester people. But I'll invite Deputy Chief Executive to say maybe a little bit about the numbers. Carol.
Thank you. Maybe it's something about my profession and my natural pessimistic nature, but the spending review was a little better than I expected. In the positives, there is some recognition in there of the COVID-related costs that we're facing, and also some recognition of the issues that we will have in not being able to collect business rates and council tax. There is also some recognition of the pressures that social care are under. I am slightly concerned about the shift in balance of funding away from grant funding towards precept, and indeed we're out to consultation on potential precept increases at the moment, and the lack of parity with NHS with public health grant not getting any inflation, for example, and the improved Better Care Fund not getting any inflation allowance, only the core Better Care Fund being uplifted. It's difficult to say precisely what this will mean for us until we get the actual finance settlement. That is rumoured to be the 17th of December, which I think is the last day before the planned Christmas reset. I think I also have some, whilst there are some positives in there and that could improve our position, it's difficult to speculate until we get the settlement. But with the recognition of the costs, the ability to raise the precept and some of the grant funding in there, it could improve our position by around 40 to 50 million. But as I said, I wouldn't want to sort of state anything definitively until we get the finance settlement. As the Leader of the Council's outlined, that puts us in the sort of 50 million sort of region for cuts, because as if you recall, we're facing a gap of around 100 million next year, which puts us in the ability to deliver a balanced budget next year, although that isn't good news, clearly. I think some of my concerns with this as well is it is a one-year spending review and it will be a one-year finance settlement. We don't know what the base will be as we go into the next spending review period, and that's unlikely to include the sort of one-off costs for COVID. We'll still have uncertainty around what will happen in the longer term around areas such as business rates. Any business rates revaluation, for example, could see a significant redistribution of income around the country. And I am worried we're going to be in the same position next summer where we don't know what our funding position for future years is. That said, we are where we are, so we'll be doing the work to analyse the finance settlement when that is released in December for the budget plans, with the reports due back to go to scrutiny in early January. Thank you.
I think I'm going to take one discussion on this in item 6, because item 6 is revenue budget monitoring and the budget position 21-22. I don't want to say any more about that, but Deputy Chief Executive, do you want to say anything more about that?
Just to say on the revenue monitoring, that sets out the position for this financial year and the impact that COVID has on the following financial year. As I said in the previous item, we're still facing a significant gap of, after collection fund smoothing, the impact of COVID itself is around 130 million. Clearly there are other measures which we've outlined in the report that have closed that gap slightly. I think the additional funding we get this year will cover the COVID related pressures that we've got, and that, along with the savings measures we've already taken, should enable us to deliver a balanced budget. I think the areas in the monitoring to keep an eye on are both the longer term trends and pressures on areas such as social care and homelessness. And the report also sets out the various sources of funding and business support schemes that the Council has received that we are keeping track of and will be added to the budget.
Members, can we note the report, agree with relevant recommendations? Then move to the Greater Manchester Transport Strategy. Councillor Stoyer.
Thank you, Chair. We've got a suite of transport strategy documents under this item. So very briefly, firstly, we've got the draft Greater Manchester Transport Strategy, which has been refreshed to reflect our new challenges and opportunities in order to ensure that we've got the appropriate transport infrastructure services and support to support future growth in Greater Manchester, while keeping in our long-term vision in mind for transport in our network to be increasingly made by sustainable modes and supporting the reduction of private car journeys. At the same time, another priority is to boost and continue investing in sustainable modes of transport as well as an active travel network. The refreshed strategy also reflects the devolution agenda and a number of strategies that we have agreed for the city, for example, Streets for All and the City Centre Transport Strategy. So the second annex is the 5-year transport delivery plan, which sets out the practical actions that we need to take in the next 5 years so that we deliver the 2040 transport strategy, and it has been developed together with our key stakeholders in the city. So with the 9 other local authorities, Highways England, Network Rail, the airports, HS2 and other key stakeholders. The final annex is the Manchester Implementation Plan. This covers our own, the city's transport priorities for the next 5 years and provides another added layer, if you like, of detail that complements the other outcomes. Just some headlines. We want to increase the number of neighbourhood journeys under 2 kilometres made by foot and by bike across the city. We want to enhance sustainable travel to and from district centres and improving Manchester streets, making them safer and more pleasant to walk. We want to support innovation and move towards and support the move towards electric vehicles as well as car sharing. And we want to improve access to bus services across the city so more of our residents can travel sustainably. The last thing for all of these documents, they have all been developed in parallel with the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, and despite the uncertain future of the GMSF as it stands and adoption across the 10 districts, this has no impact on our strategic priorities, but parts of the 2 strategies do reflect key priorities in other districts that may need to change. So there might be slight changes in the documents, but none of them are pertinent to Manchester. Therefore, there is still merit for us to approve these documents today. Thank you.
Comments from members? Can we agree to approve that? The next item is HS2 Phase 2B Western Leg Design Refinement Consultation response. And I think this is a mixture of very big good news and some not so good news. So I think the good news is that the certainty of HS2 coming to Manchester grows almost by the hour. We are getting close to the point where we expect to see a bill being published, and also that the prospect of Northern Powerhouse Rail happening is getting near as well, and hopefully to be built in an integrated way. Another little bit of, I think, hidden good news almost within this is an agreement within that bill will be provision for a larger capacity Metrolink stop within Piccadilly Station as part of the HS2 proposals. And again, Piccadilly is operating the tram stop at capacity now. It means that there are desirable services can't be run, and this will be really important for being able to make sure that those services can be provided. I'll pick out probably 3 downsides. One is that concerned about the views of HS2 in terms of parking and traffic management, which are rather different to the ones that Councillor Stoyer was just talking about in terms of the Greater Manchester Transport Plan. and the proposals really for the inner relief road around Mill Brow, which we're still working on, and hopefully we'll get to a solution, but certainly in our view would be the sort of excessive engineering of roads that we've managed to move away from within the city, and would certainly want to not get back into that position, but also ensuring that the car parking provision is consistent with a reduction in the number of vehicles coming into the city, not one that's planned to draw vehicles in. Part of the purpose of having Piccadilly Station as an integrated station is that people who are using other services to access high-speed rail can do so by public transport, not by having to drive into it. Clearly, there is an issue of Piccadilly Station itself, where although DfT have now approved work to be done on exploring the underground option, the bill is almost certainly going to have what we consider an inferior surface option on the face of it, and it will require an alternative provision if we are to prevail with the case for an underground station. And since we last discussed it, I think my view and the view of the Mayor of Greater Manchester, who, amongst other things, holds the transport portfolio for Greater Manchester, is that the case for underground has been strengthened. Not least, we've been looking at the options for improving rail services from Sheffield to Manchester and Manchester Airport, moving to 4 services an hour, 2 of which are proposed to use that Northern Powerhouse Rail High-Speed 2 station. So the fact that it hasn't currently got the capacity for that would seem to argue that the underground option becomes even more important. The last thing two things, sorry. We continue to make the case for the airport station to be a wholly integrated station. That, I think, is relatively neutral as far as this is concerned. It is yet to be decided, but it is important that that should happen, and in particular that the western leg of the Wythenshawe Loop, the Metrolink Loop, should be built as part of that. I see Councillor Taylor is far more interested in that nowadays. Not surprised. Then the last thing I want to talk about is Birchfield Road's vent shaft. Something that the Council has opposed the HS2 proposal. Community, local councillors and indeed councillors from neighbouring wards have all opposed that, but not on a Chilterns NIMBYism, in that they have proposed 3 alternative locations within the immediate area where that could be located. And it's really disappointing that when you get that level of cooperation from local members, that frankly it has been ignored. So those are the concerns, and those are concerns we'll be feeding back to High Speed 2. But I think I will finish where I started, which is to reiterate, notwithstanding that we have those issues that we wish to pursue, that we remain wholly committed to High Speed 2, which obviously has been a key part of the long-term future of public transport in this country. Attached to that, we've always said that High Speed 2 should be a network, not a single line, and I think it's important that as well as High Speed 2 coming to Manchester, that the eastern leg is built as well. So this is what becomes win-win about having an improved rail network for the country, not just a single line. I don't know, Hilary, do you want to say anything, add anything?
I don't think so, Chair. Thanks. I think that's a good summary of where we are. Obviously, we continue to work with HS2 and Transport for the North to make sure we do get the best solutions for the city and for the network.
Strategic Director, anything you want to add?
The only point I would add is that the Executive are being asked to note our proposed response to the consultation we plan to submit on the 11th of December, so that's imminent now, and the other points have been outlined by both Councillor Lees and Hilary. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I broadly support what's being proposed to go in the consultation, with one with one real comment, and that's in relation to there being no mention of the vent shaft on Withington Golf Course in my own Didsbury West ward. Unlike Birchfield Road, HS2 did listen to concerns raised in relation to the actual location of the original location of the vent shaft and have moved it. And I think there is general support for the relocation of where it's now being proposed. But there are some impacts of the moving of it from one part of the golf course onto another. And there are some serious environmental impacts by having a vent shaft there, mainly because that's where they intend to take all the stuff that's dug out of the earth from, in both directions. And there are very serious concerns about the removal of woodland and in order to have an area to have access for vehicles. But there are some very legitimate concerns about the number of vehicle movements. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, I think there should have been something in the response to the consultation about the need for mitigation work because of the environmental impact of the construction site, and also dealing with some of the problems that will undoubtedly arise from the number of vehicle movements to and from the site when they're actually under construction.
I think one of the things that we've done, I don't know if you can say a bit more about this, Hilary, but in terms of the removal of spoil, that's clear for that tunnel is an awful lot, is that they should be using effectively the railway to move it, rather than having trucks in the middle of the city. Do you say anything about that, Hilary?
Yeah, so we have been pressing HS2 to look at options for removing, as Councillor Leach has said, more of the spoil by rail using a railhead close to the airport. They are removing some of it from Piccadilly by rail, but clearly there is an issue at the airport end, so we are continuing to press for that, which we hope will take an element of the lorries off the road. But we're certainly happy to reflect those points that you've made there, Councillor Leach, within the final response.
If it's not adequately reflected in the response, it is certainly something we have been taking up very strongly as a council about apart from the impact on Withington itself, about minimising road movements full stop in terms of the removal of spoil. So wherever that there will be, if it is removed by a lorry, there will be a large number of movements that we could do without, really. Okay. The recommendations are to largely to note, but also to delegate authority to the Strategic Director, Growth and Development, in consultation with myself and Councillor Stoyer to finalise the response. Can we agree that recommendation? And then item 9, we move to purpose-built student accommodation. I think there's kind of a little bit of oddity about this report is that I know Councillor Richards has been plagued by attention, think it's a housing report, when actually it's a planning report. So I think actually members have got a little bit confused about this. Also, not only is it a planning report, it's a planning report that says we can't change policy. So there isn't a change of policy around student accommodation here, because until we go, if we want to change it, we will have to do that through the local plan process, which we have gone through the key issues consultation, but we have a long way to go before we could get to the stage of having the policies that are ready for public examination, etc., etc. So we have a report here that in policy terms says don't change, we can't change the policy. So quite clear. Our policy, planning policy on purpose-built student accommodation stays the same. What has changed though, and this is really what the work has been very much about, is the circumstances in which we apply that policy. And what we find with purpose-built student accommodation within the city, that we haven't got enough of it. And not having enough of it leads to a lot of it being, compared to other cities, expensive, some cases very expensive. The fact that some of it's very expensive is partly what pushes students to take up general housing rather than purpose-built student housing. A lot of what is purpose-built is not in particularly good condition. It doesn't meet modern standards. A lot of it is in the wrong place. And for all of those reasons, we need to be adopting a different approach. And that different approach is that we will look to support purpose-built student accommodation, first of all, where it is close to the universities themselves, so it minimises the need to travel, where it minimises the impact on other communities, neighbourhoods, and so on. It's a bit clear that students are very, very welcome within the city, but I'm sure, as Councillor Elias will say, that occasionally there can be a little bit of a conflict between the lifestyles of large numbers of 18 to 21-year-olds and the other members of the population. So there is important issues. But what we will be looking for is high density development, generally speaking, close walking distance to the universities that minimises the impact on existing and surrounding communities, and frees up, so it won't free it all up, but frees up family accommodation, particularly in the south of the city, where we have a desperate need for more family accommodation. I don't know if Julie, you want to say any more about this, or again, Hilary, but...
I don't think so, Chair. I'm not sure I could be as clear as yourself on the reason why we're bringing the report this time. It really is about setting the context. We've got a policy that was introduced in 2012. Those key principles in the policy are still absolutely right, but the context has changed. And what we've been trying to do in the decision-making process is ensure that when people are coming to talk to us, we can focus on the need for quality, for the offer to be right, affordability, and actually to try and reduce the impact on neighbourhoods. Thank you, Chair.
I don't know, Councillor Story, if it's, no, you're not saying anything? No, okay. Councillor Elias.
Thank you, Chair. As you're aware, Fallowfield is one of the most popular places in the city for students to call home during their time studying here. So students are a huge asset to our city and are absolutely welcome. However, the current structures do not work in advancing cohesive, mixed-use and generational communities. If the evidence goes on to demonstrate that purpose-built student accommodation will directly result in HMOs converting back, then this will be welcomed, as it can provide a better student experience and allow homes to be used for other purposes. I welcome a policy that will take into consideration existing communities and student populations when looking at potential sites. As more purpose-built student accommodation in places like Fallowfield, which would entail placing more student populations in high-density areas already experiencing pressures on services, is no longer the right way forward, which is something I know residents in Fallowfield do not support. Therefore, I think it's good that other sites with good transport links near the universities will also be considered. Thank you.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the clarification in relation to the policy and not being able to actually change at this stage. That's reduced what I'm going to say. I do think if you read, well, a couple of comments and then a couple of questions as well. My only real comment was the lack of input from students into the consultation process, which was pretty low. 78 students out of however many thousands of students that we have in Manchester. So it's disappointing that there wasn't that students didn't engage in the consultation more. My concern is that from reading this report, it's very difficult to actually understand what the council's position is in relation to, for instance, the affordability of student accommodation, what proportion of student accommodation should be affordable, what's our definition of affordability, and in terms of getting the right mix of students and settled communities within our districts. There's no information in this report that actually says what our position is. And given that the local plan is not going to be reviewed until 2023, I'm guessing that it probably won't be implemented until 2024. In the meantime, I think there's a lack of clarity for potential developers and potential developments about what the City Council is going to be expecting in the local plan. And what I would have liked to have seen is some indication of what our definition of affordability is expected to be within the local plan, what proportion of student accommodation within a new block will be expected to be of an affordable range, and what is that affordability? Is it the NUS definition of affordability, or is it a different definition of affordability? I don't think there's enough clarity in this report to at least steer developers and developments that are going to come up before the local plan is actually considered. I mean, just one example on 6.3, page 98. It relates to I can't see it now. It relates to what do we define as being close to the city centre? What is close to what is close to the universities? What's close to one person might be considerably different to what is considered to be close to another person. So I would have liked to have seen at least some clarity on what we would expect to be the changes implemented as part of the local plan to try and steer developers and developments in the direction that we will hopefully be travelling in when the local plan is amended.
Anybody else? Might perhaps give a couple of indications. It's close is subjective. I talked about being within walking distance, but obviously for some people walking distance is 0. And for I reasonably regularly walk from Crumpsall into the town hall, so that my walking distance is different. So that there are different definitions, but I think normally you take a rough range of maybe 10 minutes as being a reasonable walking distance. So, but you can't be precise about that, and if we try to be over precise, we would effectively we would fall foul, certainly through the appeals process, of trying to, I'm looking at Julie, but imposing rules that are not sustainable, basically. Delighted to see that Julie's nodding, but so we have to be careful about that. But I'll take a scheme that may come forward for planning. This is not wishing to prejudge it in any way, but if you've got a scheme that ties together replacing student accommodation in Rusholme with family housing and affordable family housing, with purpose-built student accommodation on effectively on the UMIST site, that would appear to be something that basically moves accommodation closer to the universities, very close to the universities, but also has a positive impact on the area that it's being moved on. We probably won't have too many of those sorts of examples, but that is the kind of sort of change that we might talk about. Whereas other than perhaps the refurbishment of, say, Owens Park, if somebody wanted to build a great big block of student accommodation out in Fallowfield, we would probably not be well disposed to it at the moment. Because say that's whilst we can deal with the history, then we don't compound the history if it's not what we need any further. Okay, can we agree the recommendations on this report? Yep. Which takes us to item 10, which is withdrawal from school catering. Councillor Ryman.
Thank you, Chair. This is clearly not a decision that we have taken lightly, and ideally we would like to have continued to keep providing the service, but with the changing landscape around schools, education and more schools being academised, and the decision that we took many years ago to put money where it really matters in our schools, in the learning and teaching of our children and young people, has meant that Manchester Fair has over a number of years declining quite significantly, to the extent that we've had to subsidise the service for the last 2 years certainly, and before that we have been subsidising it with the hidden subsidies around overheads, whether that's to do with legal, HR and finance. It's also very important to note that this proposal is not a budget cut, it's not a service reduction, and neither are there any job losses proposed within this proposal. However, we do take very seriously the comments made by Resources and Governance Scrutiny Committee, and I know that all members of this council share concerns around low-paid workers that are working within this service, and it is for that reason that this decision and this proposal isn't simply one based on commerce and on numbers. If that was the case, then in 2018 we would have been here asking for the withdrawal of this service. We didn't do that. We continued to subsidise the service through the reserve that we built up within Manchester Fair, whilst exploring a whole number of options and different operating models in order for us to make the business sustainable. None of those options were feasible. Having said that, that is not the end of it. The reason we need a decision today is to be able to give schools enough time and notice, and school governing boards enough time and notice for them to be able to look at alternative arrangements, but also to give us the ability to support the staff, work with the trade unions and the schools and the governing bodies in making sure that through this 2P process, that fair working conditions are maintained, if not enhanced. We'd also like to carry on exploring other options, so there will be conversations. We've had a number of conversations with other Greater Manchester districts, and then we will be talking to, by the end of this process, all the Greater Manchester districts to see if there's any potential for a collaboration or some other form, a model that could make this service more sustainable. In addition to that, I know 3 providers have already been in contact with officers of the council, talking about potentially taking the 74 schools that we've got left in our portfolio as a block. Clearly, if that negotiation is to go any further, we will insist on binding contracts to make sure that the staff conditions are protected, that the Manchester living wage is paid to people, there are no redundancies, and that there are no decline or deterioration of staff working terms and conditions within that contract. In order to continue this service, it would mean that we would have to subsidise this service by £600,000 next year and up to £1 million in the following year. That is assuming that we return to pre-COVID levels of provision, but also assuming that we retain all the schools that we've currently got, which probably isn't going to be the case because we've already had notice from 4 schools that have intending to leave. We know that there are a number of other schools who are in preparation to serve notice to Manchester Fair, also wanting to leave. So the subsidy could potentially be a lot bigger than £1 million in subsequent years. I also want to contrary to some of the misinformation that's out there around outsourcing, this is not a case of the council outsourcing. Indeed, we can't outsource. We're a contractor. Schools have the responsibility and the budget to provide school meals, and they contract Manchester Fair as a provider for that. So therefore, we are not in a position to outsource. That is the duty and responsibility of our schools. Out of the 185 schools, 110 of them have already left us, and we know that just about 70% of them have chosen to provide school meals in-house. The other 30% have elected to outsource to alternative providers. We haven't been made aware of any major concerns around the 2P process there, or any dilution of workers' terms and conditions, and I know Paul and Gary will comment further about the feedback that we've had from schools. As I alluded to earlier, Chair, in order for us to continue this service, we will require a subsidy of £600,000 this year and potentially £1 million the year after. Given the scale of budget cuts that this council is facing, that will undoubtedly mean job losses and service reductions elsewhere in the council. However, as I said earlier on, it is important that we continue to work with our staff workforce, with the trade unions, to make sure that this transition is as smooth as possible and that the worker terms and conditions are protected. And that is, I think, essentially for members and for the comments that have come back from scrutiny committee, is around that workforce, particularly because they are some of the most low-paid staff in our service, and predominantly women and part-time workers. But as I've outlined, we haven't had any issues in previous 2P processes. I am going to ask either the City Solicitor or the Deputy Chief Executive to give us an indication of our legal standing around the 2P process. Okay. And the other final point that I would want to, before ending, is in 2018 we did work towards remodelling this service. Whilst we were subsidising it from the reserves, we looked at a number of options, but also looked at how we can make the business more attractive. So there was a comms campaign around that, and there were a number of activities that took place within Manchester Fair. And I know the nutritionists and other managers within the service were regularly proactively seeking business, but in the first instance trying to retain the schools that we've had. Of course, that hasn't been as successful as we would have liked it to have been, and therefore we are in this situation that we find ourselves in. In terms of nutritional standards, I know Councillor Bridges is going to talk a little bit about nutritional standards, so I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to ask Executive to support the recommendations of this proposal.
Thanks, Councillor Arman. I kind of go in order. I'm going to bring in City Solicitor first to give us advice on the extent to which 2P will adequately prevent workers who are transferred. I'll then ask Councillor Bridges to give feedback from schools. I was going to say, Councillor Bridges, that the Director for Education is not on the call, so anything you thought she might have said, you're going to have to say. Although we do have the Director of Children's Services with us, of course. I'll say in terms of the recommendations, that again I'll be asking the Executive to support the recommendations, but with two additions, and the additions are. That in parallel we do explore, as Councillor Rahman's indicated, the extent we can either with or by other local authorities in Greater Manchester can continue to maintain a service, and we'll contact all of the local authorities in Greater Manchester, and also to be equally clear about what it would take to make the service potentially viable, although I think that basically probably comes down to increasing the school meal charge by 30p. But I think we need to be clear, we do need to explore those options in parallel to what we have before us. So the City Solicitors says she can come in when needed. Fiona, you're needed.
Thank you, Leader. So in relation to 2P applying, there's basically two options here in relation to what could happen following Manchester Fair withdrawing. If they withdraw and the service is then provided by the school, 2P would apply, and in essence the staff would be employed by the school in the same way that they have been employed up to date, so they would remain Manchester City Council employees. If, however, it went to the service level agreements went through to a new provider, then the majority of staff would be 2P'd over. The ones that might not be were any staff who weren't going to a specific school where they had specifically working, and there would be a consideration about those. However, what I would say is that we would be making sure that we would be negotiating with any provider who is taking over all of the contracts, because if one provider was taking over all of the contracts, we would ensure that there was agreement in relation to take on the workforce. I do understand there have been some concerns by some members about whether or not 2P would apply. 2P would apply initially. What we can't say going into the future is whether or not there would subsequently be an application by any provider to change terms and conditions, but they would have to jump over a number of hurdles for any terms and conditions to be changed. Also, in relation to pensions, just to be clear, that if staff were moving to another provider, then there is a requirement upon that provider to ask for the staff to be considered to go into the local government pension scheme. We would make sure that those agreements were quickly drawn up, and we're ready to provide whatever support is needed within the legal team to undertake that. So, Leader, I hope that explains the position in relation to TUPE. It does apply and it will provide protection to staff. What I can't say going into the future is how any provider might try and change terms and conditions in the future, but we would do our best to protect staff by putting as many clauses in any agreement that might take place on top of it as possible. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there, Solicitor, is that the best way of protecting is actually through contractual arrangements, which either can be between us and the provider, although it's something that clearly we ought to be taking up with schools, including those schools who already have made their own provision to make sure that they are imposing contract conditions that meet what we would see as being minimum requirements, not least Manchester living wage. Is that correct? That as always, contract's better than TUPE?
Indeed, the contract will always give additional comfort.
Okay. Councillor Bridges, can you say a little bit about, from a school and nutrition point of view?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, this is quite a difficult and has been quite a contentious issue. And I think part of the challenge is it's got mixed up a little bit in the public and by some people with the issue of free school meals and with our responsibility and schools' responsibilities to feed children. So I think it is really important to make that clear that this is quite a specific issue about the provision and who is actually contracted by schools to provide those meals. And I think we've demonstrated as a council, you know, very strongly our commitment to feeding children and providing free school meals. We did right at the start of the pandemic, one of the first councils to put something in place. And obviously later on this agenda, there's something showing how we're going to get food vouchers to 43,000 children in Manchester. So that really should be beyond question our commitment to that. I think as well, one of the things that's been raised is around standards of food, and there are set standards for nutrition for schools, and it is the governing body's responsibility to make sure that those standards are met. I'm a school governor, have been for very many years, and anyone else who is a school governor would have quite a degree of confidence in that. I've been in countless meetings where the range, provision, quality and choice of the school menu has been discussed, because parents sit on that, they are very aware of what their children are, and actually, in fact, probably spend more time on that than they probably should do, because it's such a thing that people feel so passionate about. So there is quite a degree of confidence that school governors take that responsibility very, very seriously. I've had a chat with Amanda Corcoran, Director of Education, about that, and in light of this decision, if this decision taken, we will be re-emphasising those responsibilities to governors through all our chairs of governors briefings, and Amanda will explore through One Education and other people who provide services to governors any additional training or information they need to make sure they can do that part of their job properly. But as I say, certainly my experience, it is taken extremely seriously by school governing bodies. The other thing, I've been in conversation with Amanda Corcoran quite a lot about schools and their response to these proposals, and Amanda said that she originally was, unsure how schools would take them, would there be widespread concern about them, but actually that hasn't been the case at all, and schools have not reacted with widespread concern. In fact, many schools have said that they had considered moving away from Manchester Fair model, but had been put off those decisions because of COVID and all of the other things that they've been dealing with. So that kind of gives us quite a lot of confidence that schools feel confident and able to move their provision. And as Councillor Rahman said, actually, more schools do not use Manchester Fair than do. I know, as I said, I'm a governor, my school doesn't, the other primary school in my ward does not. And that's the case for many members as well. I know members have expressed concern, but actually, quite often the schools in their ward are not using Manchester Fair either. So I think when officers come to you and say, we're facing £50 million budget cuts next year, and in order to maintain delivery of this service ourselves would require potentially £1 million from us the year after. You do have to think very, very seriously about whether that's the right thing to do, and it does feel like it's not if it leads to job losses or service reductions elsewhere. But I think, so whilst I think the issue about nutrition and about free school meals really does need to be separated, and I think hopefully that's kind of given some more information about that. Obviously, the issue that we are very want to make sure is dealt with properly is the issue about terms and conditions of staff. And I think the additional caveats that Councillor Rahman and the leader have put into what will be explored alongside this do give us some degree of assurance, and likewise the comments from the city solicitor. So I think after this decision is the really important stage where we need to make sure that those terms and conditions are protected, whatever decision schools make, whether they bring it back in source it themselves or go with another provider.
Thanks, Strategic Director. I think, perhaps had your comments and in particular discussions that have been held with trades unions.
Yeah, thank you. So Councillor Rahman has already given a good overview of the background to the service, and there's a lot more information in the report. I think there's a few things that I'd like to say. First of all, there's no question that Manchester Fair or its staff have delivered anything other than an excellent school meal service over the number of years that they have provided that, and it has been seen as best practice and received a number of awards and accolades. And clearly our preference will be for the service to be able to operate as it should do as a business unit. There has been considerable effort over a number of years to enable this. However, we recognise that at this point it's no longer possible to sustain that service. Should the service be retained, it would be necessary to increase the cost of the service to the school, and inevitably this would be reflected in the cost of the price of the meal to families. And therefore this is not a proposal that either myself or any of the officers bring forward lightly, and we absolutely recognise that there will be a personal impact on staff going through such a significant change. Since October, when it became clear through the financial review that the service could no longer be sustained, we have had a number of meetings with the trade unions to brief them on the position, and all staff and schools have received correspondence setting out the position. That was a bit complicated by COVID and through the half-term break. As you would expect, the trade unions have had a lot of questions which have attempted to answer in writing, and these are included in the papers that you've got here today. Some of the questions, though, at this stage we can't answer as it depends on the decisions that schools themselves need to make. And at this stage it's been clear that there is some feedback from schools, but not all schools have had the opportunity to discuss with their governing bodies, and clearly that's where the decisions need to be made. Of the schools that have been back in touch, it does look like we have had contact from 6 schools, and 4 of those have indicated an intention to take the service in-house into the school. One of the main concerns that the trade unions have raised does relate to the TUPE process, and the city solicitor has already set out the implications in this case. I think the particular concern that the trade unions raise is a level of detail about how the relief staff would be considered, and at the moment we know that there are 12 staff that are not assigned to a particular school, and we would be looking at a range of options, including redeployment within the council if that was required. If the option to transfer to one provider was taken forward, then we expect that those staff would move with the whole service. But these are some of the details that we'll need to work through over the next few months, subject to a decision being made. The trade unions also raised concerns regarding the equality impact assessment undertaken, in that it didn't directly consider the impact on staff employed in the service. I can confirm that I have personally liaised with the city solicitors team and the equalities team, and that the equality impact assessment has been completed correctly. It does focus on the service offered, which remains the responsibility of the school, and therefore there is no change to the current position. So the EIAs does not take account of the staff in the service, but they are taken account of through policies and procedures in the way that the city solicitor set out. We are absolutely committed to continue to work with the trade unions to address as many concerns as we can, with support from our HR colleagues, from procurement and from legal. And the proposed lead-in time to September 21 allows time for us to work through all of the issues raised that we're not able to answer at this point, and very importantly, allows schools to consider their position and responses. Since this proposal became public, 3 operators who already provide school meals for some schools in the city have approached us. We're not able to name these providers at this stage. However, we have been very, very clear, even at this early stage, that should it be an option that we consider, there would have to be some very strongly built-in commitments, contractual arrangements in terms of staff terms and conditions, including adherence to the Manchester living wage. At this point, we can't move any further forward without executive making a decision on that. The other concern that members have raised and the trade unions have raised and Councillor Bridges has addressed relates to the quality of the school meal and the nutritional standards. Quite rightly, this is a responsibility of the school, but we do recognise that there is some perhaps work that we can do with schools and with others around the quality assurance of that, and that is the discussion that we're having with Amanda Corcoran. Members have also asked that we explore options to partner with other Greater Manchester authorities, and this is something that we are progressing, and the City Treasurer is supporting us through with the GM Treasurers Group. At this point, informally, we know that other Greater Manchester authorities have retained some level of the free school meals budgets, which they then appropriately use to subsidise their offer. Indications are at this stage from the ones that we've spoken to that they're not likely to want to subsidise a service in Manchester where schools already hold that budget, but we will be looking at that in much more detail. In summary, Manchester Fair is a trading service within the council. The budget to pay for the service sits within the schools and we are a contractor. As such, it should not be in receipt of any further subsidy through the council's general fund. The current position is that the service is not sustainable and therefore we are asking executive to agree that Manchester Fair will no longer be a provider from September 2021. And in addition, we are asking executive to approve further work to be undertaken with the 3 providers referenced within the same timescale. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Councillor Leach.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to City Solicitor for the clarity around the TUPE arrangements, which, because obviously the report from scrutiny did raise some alarm bells about whether or not TUPE would apply. I think my concern with this is in 3.4, it makes it very clear that cost savings have already been introduced and there are no further cost savings that can be made effectively. It's been made very clear that there hasn't been a drop in standard of nutrition where schools have taken it in-house or used other providers. I think you, Chair, actually made a comment at scrutiny about that, saying there's actually some evidence in some schools it's improved, which is great. So if there's no reduction in the quality of the meals, and there's no further savings that can be made administratively, it does worry me that that an alternative provider, were they to take on all of the existing Manchester Fair staff, would ultimately, in order to be able to make a profit, they would have to, at some point, try and change terms and conditions in order to be economic. I suppose the only alternative, the only other issue is whether or not actually other providers are charging more than Manchester Fair is charging. I'm guessing that's not the case. But unless they're actually charging more and the schools are taking on other providers and paying more for the service, I do worry that this is just going to lead to an attack on terms and conditions of people who are ultimately going to be stupid over. Because if there aren't any more savings to be made, I can't see how there can be any other alternative to that. The flip side of that is that Councillor Rahman pointed out that most schools that have stopped using Manchester Fair have actually taken the service in-house. Now, I can't see how there can be any economies of scale using an in-house service as opposed to the Manchester Fair service, which is a much bigger organisation than a single school. So I just don't see where these savings come unless ultimately it's savings in relation to the staffing and the terms and conditions of the staff that we will be tupiing over. And that's why I remain concerned about the future of our staff if this goes ahead.
Any other members? No? Okay. I'll probably drawing this to an end, and with that is that that where schools have taken the service in-house or changed provider, I think to be clear, it's not to do with the quality of the service, which I think strategic director talked about, but quite often that it improves variety and choice available to them. And I know of many examples where it allows them to actually enhance their local supply chain. So rather than using our supply chain, they are using local suppliers. And as you know that in quite a lot of business models, that it is quite possible to be neither too big nor small enough. And I think Manchester Fair has now got into that position. It is neither big enough to get economies of scale or small enough to be able to provide that service that a school providing an in-house service can do, not least because if it's provided in-house, they take all the overheads on within the school as well. But again, I think as Councillor Arman said, is that we currently meet all of those overheads, and they come from our budget. So I think, as I would do, I asked a question about how do large companies make profit, and it is mainly that they are a lot larger. We are talking about national companies that have supply chains that allow them to get very significant economies of scale. In terms of terms and conditions, and this is really important from a city and from a council point of view, I did in my correspondence with one of the trades unions say that if there are schools where their school meal provider is not paying Manchester living wage, then we as a council would join with the trade union in campaigning, first of all, to get the governing bodies to ensure that that is part of their conditions, and that offer remains open. So I understand that there is, I think, one provider in the city that is certainly trying to, I think, reduce working hours rather than pay rates. First of all, make it clear that is not a company that we are talking to, and would not talk to that company. And again, we will join with trades unions really to ensure that governing bodies make sure that they don't allow those conditions to be diluted, because the ultimate protection, I think, as Councillor Bridges talked about in terms of nutritional standards, also for conditions of services, is the schools themselves, because it is the schools that are the procurers of these services. And that's certainly something we can do with schools to ensure that conditions are maintained. As actually we would do for any other employer, because it is council policy, we want everybody in Manchester to pay at least the Manchester living wage, Manchester real wage. I think whatever has been said, I've not seen anybody suggest that in the current climate, the City Council can continue to provide this service and provide that level of subsidy. Other local authorities effectively provide it through free school meal money. That's the reality of how the economics work. We've chosen for that money to go into schools rather than to remain as a central cost. I think that is, for me, the right choice, that for schools to be able to make the decisions about their priorities. I'm not criticising other local authorities for making other decisions, but I think we need to understand that that is the case. So if we cannot continue to provide that level of subsidy, and it's the level of subsidy which is going to get greater, because as Councillor Rahman has indicated, Councillor Bridges has indicated, and Fiona Worrell's indicated, the number, whatever we do, the number of schools using this service is going to go down, and probably go down quite significantly. So it is that we effectively either hand it back to schools on the conditions that have
been outlined. We do find a provider that is prepared to contractually commit to maintain conditions of service, or in order to make it economically viable, I think in the short term it would be increasing school meal prices by, I think, probably 30p a head, or we might find another local authority who wishes to work with us around this. I think the starting point, I think, has to be the recommendations that before us, those recommendations enhanced by agreeing that we will do that other work in parallel. And as the strategic director has said, is the actual act of handover is some time off, which does give us work to do that work in parallel. So that is what I'm going to ask the executive to agree. Agree that? Thank you. Let's move then. Can we swap items 11 and 12 round? That, apart from anything else, that will save me going out and coming back. So if we can take, there's kind of certain irony with what, if we're changing it around, what does come next, which is the Children's COVID Winter Grant. So Councillor Bridges.
Yep, thanks, Chair. So yeah, you'll see the details of what is being proposed for providing support for families over the Christmas period. Obviously, this has been a really public campaign led by Marcus Ratchford, who we should thank. Obviously, since we've had a Conservative government, the Labour Party has made a big issue of holiday hunger every time there's summer, every time there's Christmas, and it's largely fallen on deaf ears, and we've had sort of 10 years of austerity. But thankfully, it took someone like Marcus Rashford to sort of stand up and really make that issue his own and use his own personal experience to force the government very relentlessly, actually, in the way he approached it. And that led to some funding in order for us to be able to fund this scheme. There's some things in the paper which I think people should have their attention drawn to. Firstly, we've chosen to use a voucher system. So in October, when the government originally rejected the calls to feed free school meal children over the October holiday, we put in a scheme at very, very short notice, which was a cash scheme and required a registration from families who were eligible. And what we saw there was about 6,000 families out of the total registered, which is much, much lower than the number. So that sort of informed us going with this voucher approach. It takes a lot of work, actually, from officers here, and we should say massive thank you both to Amanda Corcoran and the education team, but also Julie Price and the revenue and benefits team, who are currently, I think, packing up thousands and thousands of vouchers to go to schools across the city, because this approach will mean that 43,000 children will get these vouchers across the Christmas holiday. So obviously, compared to what the numbers are for when they have to register, that's just massively better reach. And we'll make sure that the most vulnerable and those who need it most are probably the least likely to apply as well. So I think it is important that we've gone down this approach, really. The other thing to say is we've seen a big increase already in the numbers of eligible children for free school meals. I think we've had a 6% increase in recent weeks and months, and we're expecting bigger increases again. Obviously, the economic outlook with the pandemic is really horrific, and we are expecting to see massively increased numbers of families needing this. There's a few additional groups of people that we've chosen to get this support to. So children of college age who used to be on free school meals, families with children who are in an early years service that need that would be eligible for support, and families who have no recourse to public funds as well, which we know in Manchester is a very large number of families. So I think it's some really good work that's been done on our behalf, and hopefully everyone will support it, and those vouchers, which are currently, as we speak, upstairs being bundled up and ready to send out to schools, can be sent at the end of the week.
Director of Children's Services, do you want to add anything?
No, principally just in short, Chair, that we tried to approach this to cover as much a range and of vulnerable families as we can across the city. I think probably it's a good example of the Our Manchester approach. We got notice of this on the 8th of November, so people have worked incredibly at pace in order to do this. We will review the reach and the impact so that we can learn from that as we move into the next half term. And we've got a grant that follows in the summer period. We don't know what that allocation is at this moment in time. And probably that would be but the only other bit was about we've made contingency as well for fuel and utilities in the allocation of how we've approached it.
I take the point about like prep, but this was something if government hadn't funded it, we were still going to do anyway, even though we haven't got the money for it. But Councillor Leach.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question in relation to whether we were confident that the range of supermarkets that are doing the scheme will cover everyone in a local area. So, because obviously some people's access to supermarkets is not as good as other people's who drive or whatever. Are you confident that we have that there will be a local supermarket that everyone will be able to use, even if it's not necessarily their supermarket of choice?
Yes, in short, so I could have said that actually in the introduction. So the supermarkets that we've named as taking part in the Manchester scheme are the ones that actually came forward. And they have actually offered us an uplift on what we're spending. So we're actually able to feed more children and more families because they have made that offer to us. But there are obviously notable omissions depending on where you live. And I know one particular large supermarket chain in particular was noticed by its omission by some of our schools. But built into the scheme is if schools would rather make their own local arrangements, we will pay them the money to make those. So a number of them, I think probably about 60 or something, have opted to do that. And that is where they feel that there is an alternative store that meets their family's needs better. So there is a kind of catch-all, really.
Sorry, can we agree the recommendation? Yeah. And with that, I think we're getting close enough. I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and all that. Now it's very dear to my heart, as you know. And I shall leave you in Councillor Murphy's reliable hands.
Thanks, Chair. I know you leave Christmas to Councillor Carney, so I think we've done well getting some acknowledgement from you on that one. Item 11 is the recommendation regarding the Licensing and Appeals Committee relation to Hackney Carriage Fare Card. Councillor Akbar.
Thank you, Chair. Basically, when external parties make changes to their charges, for example, barrier charges or access to a taxi rank, the only way the Hackney carriages can pass that on or recoup that cost is if that charge change is translated in a change on the fare card. And we as a licensing authority obviously make them changes. Just to say, Manchester Airport Group have increased these charges because this is part of their recovery plan due to the impact of the COVID pandemic. And also to add that disabled blue badge holders and those people who are disabled and in vehicles will continue to be exempt. So the executive is being asked to approve the change to the fare card.
Director of Planning, Building Control and Licensing, anything to add?
I don't think there's anything I can usefully add, Chair.
Thanks for that. I say, while it's been a difficult time for the airport, it's obviously been a difficult time for the Hackney carriage trade as well. And by them being able to reclaim the full amount of the fare increase is what we're being proposed here. Have we got any members wanting to comment on this at all? See no indication. Are people in agreement with the recommendations? Agreed. So on that, I will continue the goodwill. Wish everyone a very happy Christmas and a very safe New Year. Thank you.